And to me, the sketch kind of embodies something that really ties to the concept of this podcast, to making worlds, which is that people can change. And it's not just that the baby sees that people used to be a piece of shit. It's that this character admits, a white middle-aged man admits he used to be a piece of shit. An older man admits he used to be a piece of shit. And then they're talking about change. Like the idea of, and at one point he says, I did a lot of work. Like there's a tender masculinity that plays in this in the weirdest way that I think is also crucial for understanding kind of like what for me is important on kind of sort of like a cultural emotional level, in addition to it being one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my life.
One of the things that is so interesting about Tim Robinson as a comic performer is the way that he sort of parodically embodies a kind of toxic masculinity in order to allow it to be torn down over and over and over and over. Um, Often by his own character's realization that what is happening right now is awful. I don't even want to be here anymore.
Yeah, yeah. That you have put yourself in a position that is untenable.
And usually you put yourself there.
Yes. I also just, speaking of Tim Robinson, he is like a guy from Detroit. He comes from like a working class, very blue collar city. And I think so much of what he does on the show is through the lens of someone who is now living in Los Angeles, potentially has been in there's a lot of office culture sketches in the show. And like, I think the lens of the show comes from that space, which I also find very fascinating. Like, if you're blue collar, you're working class, I think there's a lot of emphasis on not being tender and on like reinforcing toxic masculinity, but at the same time you're up against things like uh you know you're pro union, you have all these ideas. So I don't know, I mean, I might be drawing too much into this, but like it is
No such
really,
thing.
yeah, that's the kind of again, I grew up in like a very small industrial town, and so I don't know, I feel like sometimes even though our lenses are different, I feel close to um that lens, to that way of seeing the world, in a like, literally, I've lived in a rural place and I've lived in a city. I've never lived in the suburbs. I could not tell you what they're like. They sound insane.